Christmas is usually thought of as a time of peace and goodwill to all mankind, but in 12th century Wales, such a gesture was far from the mind of the Lord of Abergavenny. Abergavenny is a market town situated in Monmouthshire, Wales, and is almost entirely surrounded by mountains and hills. Abergavenny Castle was first established as a motte and bailey structure by the Norman Lord Hamlin de Ballan in 1087. It was built to overlook the River Usk and its valley, guarding what is now the county of Gwent against the Welsh invasions from the hills in the north and west. By 1170, the castle had become a formidable structure, comprising of a stone keep, gatehouse and a great hall, surrounded by a large curtain wall. Henry Fitzmiles, Baron of Abergavenny, was born around 1128 in Gloucester. He inherited the land and titles through his father, Miles of Gloucester, the first Earl of Hereford, becoming both High Sheriff and King's Constable. It was a dangerous time to live on the borders of England and Wales, and there were constant battles between native Welsh and the invading English. In 1163, on the eve of Easter, such a battle took place at Castle Arnold, home of Welshman Cecil ap Dyfnwal, who held lands in part of the old Welsh kingdom of Gwent, present-day Monmouthshire. Henry Fitzmiles was killed at the hands of his rival, and with no heir to his estate, his lands, including Abergavenny Castle, was passed to his nephew, William de Braose. Born around 1144, William de Braose was a court favourite of King John of England and held many titles at the peak of his power. In 1175, the young lord decided to make a statement for himself by seeking revenge against the Welshman for the death of Henry and set about organising his murder. He arranged a great feast to take place at Abergavenny Castle for the Christmas celebrations and invited Cecil, his eldest son Geoffrey, and many other Welsh leaders of Gwent to join the festivities. William assured them the meeting was to overcome their differences, reconcile, and plan a period of relative peace following times of conflict. However, some of the Welsh weren't convinced and became suspicious. Not trusting William's intentions, they ignored the invitations. But Cecil and his men agreed to the meeting, and on Christmas Day, 1175, he arrived at the castle with his family and allies, glad to make peace. Upon entering the gates, William's guests were promised a non-violent meeting and were encouraged to surrender their arms, as was customary when entering a castle on peaceful invitation. They entered the great hall, where a feast was held. The Welshmen dined on the finest goose and venison, accompanied by all the mead and beer they could consume. After watching them fill their bellies and feeling content with the evening's proceedings, William signals his men, who were lying in wait, and suddenly the doors to the great hall were barred. The dozens of unsuspecting Welshmen were ruthlessly set upon by William's armed guards and were cut down mercilessly. With everyone slaughtered, William took to his horse and galloped with his men to Castle Arnold, slaughtering the rest of Cecil's men, murdering his 7-year-old son and capturing his wife, the fate of which remains unknown. After seizing the land, he then destroyed Castle Arnold. The merciless act only increased the hostility between England and Wales, and earned William the nickname the Ogre of Abergavenny, a name fitting, given his taste for brutal acts of violence. It wasn't too long before the Welshmen took an opportunity for revenge, and almost a decade later, in 1182, Cecil's nephew, the Lord of Caerleon, led the march against the castle and set it ablaze in retribution. Luckily for the de Braose family, they were not at the castle during the siege, but most of the guards were taken hostage. English reinforcements arrived afterwards to restore order. Though he'd gotten his revenge for the death of his uncle, things didn't go too well for William de Braose. Originally favoured by King John during his early reign, and exonerated for the massacre by Gerald of Wales, who cited his generosity to local priories, the king eventually lost faith in him. He owed a large sum of money to the crown, and his wife was sought for her indiscreet comments and accusations against the king, blaming him for the murder of his own nephew, Arthur of Brittany, and so William's control of the lands and castle were removed. In 1210, following an alliance with Llewellyn the Great and rebelling against the king, William was declared an outlaw and fled to France disguised as a beggar. His wife Maud and eldest son William were captured after fleeing to Ireland. They were imprisoned at Windsor Castle, but it's thought they were later moved to an enclosed room at Corfe Castle. With only some wheat and raw bacon to eat, they starved to death in their prison. On the 11th day, the guards discovered their bodies, with Maud's head resting on her son William's chest. William de Braose, 4th Lord of Bramber, died penniless and alone the following year, in August 1211. He was buried in the Abbey of St. Victor in Paris. His hopes of returning alive to Wales and for a burial in Brecon were to be unfulfilled. Though the castle was rebuilt and expanded during the 13th and 14th centuries, the castle and town were again sacked and burned by Welsh forces during the rebellion of Owain Glyndŵr. No lord took up residence at the castle after the 15th century. During the English Civil War, King Charles I ordered the castle to be destroyed to prevent any useful occupation by his opponents. By the late 18th century, the castle began attracting visitors, and a hunting lodge, now used as the museum, was constructed along with a formal public garden. Though now a tranquil and picturesque setting, have no doubt the brutal murders and betrayals that occurred on this land have undoubtedly left a trace. Perhaps the ghosts of the Welshmen who were slain here, and even the cruel ogre of Abergavenny himself, may still wander the ruins to this day.